After the tone, please state your name followed by the pound sign. The chairperson has muted the conference. You will be joined in listen-only mode.
Rehabilitation Council for the state of Iowa. I'm pleased to have all of you join us today for this very important topic, and I'm thrilled to have Kyle Horn with us from America's Job Honor Awards. Thank you, Kyle, for joining us today. He will be talking about thriving in a talent war, innovative solutions through Iowa's untapped workforce. Kyle is the founder and director of the Iowa Job Honor Awards, celebrating individuals who have overcome significant barriers to employment and the employers who hire them. His passion is to equip disadvantaged job seekers with the tools required to win meaningful employment. Launched in 2014, his Iowa-based initiative is expanding nationally under the banner of America's Job Honor Awards. Before we turn the call over to Kyle, I would like to take a minute to thank our sponsors that helped make this three-part education series possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and I'd like to just echo your gratitude for the sponsors who have helped us to launch this three-part educational series. They're certainly contributing to something that is timely and that is needful in the Iowa business climate. You know, one thing that we have seen in recent months is an increasing concern among Iowa employers over their inability to find qualified talent for their open positions. And that is also true of many of the states around us and indeed much of the nation. And when you hear conversations regarding the American talent shortage, frequently what you hear are a lot of hand-wringing statements and not a lot of statements really that are designed to get us to the needed goal of having a good pipeline of available candidates. We've been long on diagnosis and short on cure. And I think we've seen that certainly in Iowa. And what we're proposing in these three sessions certainly does speak to the idea of a cure. It's a solution, or at least a partial solution, to Iowa's talent crisis. And it's one that also carries with it a lot of other win-wins along with it. So I'm thrilled that we're focusing on this and giving it the time and attention that it deserves. Because truly we are in the midst of a talent war, and the companies that thrive in the coming years will be the ones who are creative and effective at bringing in some good talent, despite the fact that it's a tough environment in which to do so. And the companies who cannot, frankly, are going to be left behind. You know, here in Iowa, we've heard a tremendous amount of discussion attending the skilled gap. And this speaks to the positions primarily that pay 18, 20, 22 bucks an hour, you know, whether it be a CNC operator or in an office setting, someone with like a 2-year degree, and the inability to find talent for those positions. And while that's very true, we do have a notable gap there. Less discussion is being focused on the entry-level gap. And that's something that's near and dear to my heart. I have found in discussions with manufacturers across the state that they nearly all have something in common: an inability to find qualified entry-level workers. They can't find sufficient numbers of production workers, material handlers, assemblers, or in an office setting, contact center employees. And it may be that these positions are discussed less frequently because it's less appealing to talk about jobs, frankly, that pay 10, 12, or 14 bucks an hour. And yet, that's where it begins for a lot of individuals who are entering the workforce. Moreover, that talent will not arrive from any other location. We won't have a spaceship arrive with individuals ready to work 10, 12, $14 an hour jobs in Iowa. They're not going to come bussing up from Texas. It takes 18 years to make an 18-year-old, and we just don't have enough young workers entering the workforce. And finally, our lack of entry-level talent is unsettling for another reason. The skilled trades tend to be filled by individuals who rise up from the entry-level ranks, and that pipeline, as we've demonstrated, is dwindling. And so unless Iowa employers want to look out on half-empty production floors or half-empty contact centers in a few years, it's clear that it's time to get creative. We need to look to alternative sources of talent. And in today's session, we propose precisely that. It is a source of talent that's a huge win-win for the state of Iowa, and we will detail why that is so. So at any rate, thank you again. It's a real pleasure to be here. I do want to give you a little bit of background on how I came to be the director of America's Job Honor Awards, the long walk that brought me to this place. It began when I was working as branch manager for Manpower, Staffing and Recruiting in Ames, Iowa. And that position really opened up my eyes to the realities of the Iowa workforce. I think we all tend to hang out with people who are like us. And frankly, my circle of friends at the time largely consisted of individuals who were like me. You know, they were plugged into a career, working away, and things were going relatively well. They got a good career arc, and what's to worry? And I had always known academically that there were large numbers of individuals in the state of Iowa who were chronically unemployed and underemployed. But frankly, I didn't have a lot of firsthand knowledge of those individuals. They just did not occupy my sphere of influence. Well, that changed when I accepted the branch managership of Manpower, because suddenly I was faced with individuals coming in our doors seeking employment, many of whom had barriers to employment. Now, a lot of our applicants were workforce ready, and we were able to deploy them out to some satisfying jobs that turned into careers for a lot of them. But some individuals who came in our doors were not ready for the workforce. It was evident that they were struggling with some manner of barrier to employment, whether it was a pattern of prior criminal convictions and no clear evidence that that pattern was broken. It may have been people who, it was evident, had been struggling with issues of alcohol or drug addiction that were evidently unresolved. In some cases, the wounds weren't so much self-inflicted, but just the reality of their lives. It may have been individuals who were struggling with English proficiency, and their inability to speak English fluently was preventing them from getting good jobs, even if they were highly skilled individuals, even professionals in their home country. And others who had no reliable transportation, and still others who were struggling with mental or physical disabilities at some point on a spectrum. And in many of those cases, I could sense that with some modest accommodation, that person would be off to the races. But in many cases, those individuals were not a match with our clients' needs. And as a result of that, at the conclusion of the interview, we would be forced to shake their hand, thank them for coming in, probably give them an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with some references of agencies that might be of benefit to them in their job search, and send them on their way. And I was always haunted by the ones we couldn't help. And I made a mental note that if ever it was in my power to do something to help bridge the gap between those individuals and meaningful employment, I wanted to do so. Shortly thereafter, my career shifted to business development. So rather than business to candidate facing, my primary contacts were business to business. And here the irony opened up fully before me, because as I stated at the top, I talked to scores of employers who lamented their inability to find qualified workers, even for entry-level positions. And of course, I had just left a world of thousands whose lives would be radically transformed by those jobs, and now I see that those jobs exist. So the chasm between those two realities really loomed large in my mind, and I knew that something had to be done to bridge that chasm. And that's when I first had the idea for the Iowa Job Honor Awards. Our whole premise is we have two categories of honorees. We celebrate individuals who have overcome significant barriers to employment and the employers who hire them. And as you'll see here in a moment, it's critical that we have those two, because that's both ends of the equation, in my view, both the supply side and the demand side for those candidates. We need to impact hearts on both ends of that equation. And we had our first annual Job Honor Awards in Iowa in 2014. It was actually in Cedar Rapids on the third and final day of the Iowa Association of Business and Industries annual conference. And all the stars aligned. It was a great crowd. And we had Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs fame was the keynoter immediately after me, and that had swelled attendance to nearly 1,000 in the Paramount Theater. And suffice it to say, we showed 4 videos for our 4 honorees. These honoree videos are 3 minutes apiece, and we had 2 individual honorees and 2 company honorees, and the crowd's reaction exceeded our wildest expectations. And perhaps some of you were in attendance. If you were not, there is a video of the complete first-year ceremony on our website. But the crowd really reacted emotionally. And some of the feedback I received afterwards from individuals in attendance, individuals who in some cases had worked most of their careers in the human services sector, they told me they thought it was a game changer to see individuals, employers getting excited and enthusiastic about the prospect of hiring disadvantaged candidates. And they deemed that to be a game changer. So I knew we were on to something. I approached Manpower's corporate office in Milwaukee to see if we could get some sponsorship to roll this nonprofit out nationally. And indeed, they were interested. And so we've been working under the banner since then of America's Job Honor Awards. And we are intent on moving this thing into every state of the union and eventually hopefully impacting hearts nationwide to encourage people to hire disadvantaged candidates. So what began as Iowa Job Honor Awards has transitioned to America's Job Honor Awards. The Wisconsin Job Honor Awards will debut in February of 2016. So that's what I've been up to. That's why I have a heart for this whole field, and that's why I'm talking to you today, because the problem couldn't be more clear. Iowa employers don't have enough candidates to fill their open positions. Simultaneously, thousands of Iowans can't find jobs because they have barriers to employment. We must do more to bridge that gap. Now here you can see graphically some of the barriers to employment displayed. We have criminal records, limited English skills, no transportation, drug and alcohol abuse, no marketable skills, and poor work history. And obviously a big component of these barriers to employment are mental and physical disabilities to one degree or another. And obviously our whole goal is to bring people from the left side of that equation over to the right side of that equation. Now here's another way of looking at it. In the middle of this equation, we have workforce development agencies who are tasked with equipping those disadvantaged job seekers with both the technical and the life skills required to get and hold a job. And we're very fortunate. In Iowa, we have some wonderful agencies. In some cases, state agencies. Iowa Workforce Development has some terrific programs that they train in-house, teaching such things as work ethic, appropriate behaviors on the job, and helping to equip some of those basic fundamental behaviors. We also have federal agencies. The Veterans Affairs has done a terrific job of training up returning veterans who are having a difficult time acclimating to a civilian workforce. And a number of community-based and faith-based organizations also at work in this field. And they're very good at specializing in their particular constituency. It may be, for example, that their focus is on the blind or visually impaired individuals. Another agency's focus may be on ex-offenders and how they can get back into the workforce. And so they all do a wonderful job. They have proven and debugged programs. And what I have found in my research, when you look at this equation, is there are two major bottlenecks. The first bottleneck is on the end of the disadvantaged job seekers. Many of them have succumbed to despair, and they have simply opted out of the workforce altogether. And I'll soon share with you the numbers that prove that. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of individuals, many of whom could theoretically have jobs. But it may be, for example, an ex-offender who took some courses, tried to get back into the workforce, but found that door after door has been slammed shut. So eventually, they simply withdraw from the workforce altogether, dragging their past like a ball and chain, never to be seen from or heard from again, unless and until they reoffend. And of course, the likelihood of recidivism skyrockets if an individual cannot find employment. Maybe individuals with varying degrees of mental or physical disability who, with some accommodation and some coaching, could survive and thrive in the workforce, but they've never been able to connect those dots. And eventually their confidence is so eroded that they withdraw, they give up, and they succumb to despair. And it may also be older workers encountering age discrimination, veterans who've never been able to make the shift back to civilian employment, et cetera. They're languishing there on the left end of the equation. And sometimes it's difficult to attract those individuals to the workforce development agencies that can help them overcome those barriers. So frequently what's wanting is encouragement and inspiration. And America's Job Honor Awards tries to do just that. You imagine the power, especially for a child, seeing a video of someone who looks like you. They're from the same tough neighborhood as you, and they got out, and now they are in front of this crowd, adulation is being heaped on that person for what they've accomplished. And it teaches a number of lessons. First of all, if society values an ethic, society should celebrate that ethic. And we all tend to talk about that vaunted Midwestern work ethic, and I'm sure most parts of the nation do the same thing, that vaunted New Englander work ethic or whatever. And the fact is, it's dying. And I think one of the reasons it is we don't reinforce it. Instead, we celebrate lottery winners. We celebrate movie stars, hip-hop artists. But seldom do we celebrate individuals whose lives are transformed through the hard work and perseverance that leads to meaningful employment. It's time for a new kind of hero, and that's the tagline of the Job Honor Awards. So we need to make the individuals heroes who have undertaken that journey into meaningful employment, and set them up as exemplars for others who may indeed follow that same path. Bottleneck number 2 occurs on the employer end of the equation. And here it's not surprising. It's the duty of the hiring manager to reduce risk for their organization. And one of the best ways of reducing risk is to not hire individuals who have troubled backgrounds. And what I call the hiring manager's axiom is the greatest predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And I have absolutely no argument with that axiom, having served as a hiring manager for many years. And indeed, past behavior usually is all you have to go by. If you're sitting across the desk from a total stranger, looking at their employment history and trying to make a decision whether you take a chance on that individual and invite them into your workforce, you have a limited number of data points. And if they have blown it repeatedly in the past, and if there is nothing in their story to indicate that anything about them has changed, then you'd be a fool to hire that person, because you know that those same patterns of failure that predominated to this point in their lives are likely to continue into the future. So you can't blame employers for being reluctant. Now, it's the premise of the Job Honor Awards that we do not advocate for the indiscriminate hiring of red flag candidates. Our premise is simple. It is individuals who have been trained and vetted by a reputable workforce development agency represent no greater risk of turnover than a member of the general public. And indeed, many employers would probably take that a step further and say they represent a lower risk owing to the intense training and scrutiny that they have undergone. So therefore, what we propose to employers is, if you have an individual who has a background, rather than make that background automatically excluding from your hiring process, take a second look and see whether they have attempted to address those barriers by working with a reputable workforce development agency. And if individuals within that agency are able to point out that the person has taken great measures to overcome those barriers, then that's a good indicator that the person is workforce ready and ready for prime time. Because obviously the heads of these workforce development agencies know that their reputation rides on that vetting process. So they will be very reluctant to recommend to your organization an individual who is still iffy. They're going to try to lead with their strongest candidates. So you can, while there's always uncertainty where human beings are involved, you can place a great deal of confidence in a facilitator of a workforce development agency telling you, look, we had a 15-week program, 4 nights a week, 4 hours a night. This person was here like clockwork. They contributed to class. They've given every indication that they understand the weaknesses that they needed to overcome, and we've seen them work to overcome those weaknesses. But we think they're ready for work. That's something that, while I'd be reluctant to say you can take it to the bank, you can certainly ascribe importance to that sort of a statement. That removes a lot of layers of risk. And so those are the two bottlenecks, and that's the supply end and the demand end of the equation that we are trying to impact with the Job Honor Awards. Through our videos and through our speaking events and other public engagements, we're trying to encourage job seekers who may have given up that you can make another run at this, that there are people like you who have overcome their barriers. And at the same time, with our employer honorees, we want the message to get out. These employers are stating to a person that these are not charity jobs. These individuals that they are hiring, these unconventional candidates, are elevating morale organization-wide. And moreover, they report that their company is reaping the benefit of goodwill from the public. And that's something that's going to become a greater and a greater factor and a differentiator for companies, particularly in this era of encroaching, the word escapes me, the encroaching tendency of customers to group them all together. Commoditization, that was the word I was struggling for. And in an era of commoditization, this is an opportunity for employers to differentiate themselves as the employer with a good social conscience. And we'll speak more in a moment about the importance of that. So again, it's a balanced business-like approach. We don't advocate for indiscriminate hiring of red flag candidates. We recognize that unless and until candidates have taken steps to overcome their barriers to employment, they're frankly probably unemployable. Our premise is, as I stated, candidates with barriers to employment who have been trained and vetted by a reputable workforce development agency represent no greater risk of turnover than a candidate from the general public, and indeed, probably less. Our original intent had been to play a video here, but we've taken a different approach, asking you to watch the videos beforehand and potentially after my remarks, and hopefully you've all had an opportunity to see a couple of the videos, which will give you a great idea of what the Job Honor Awards is all about. So I do want to discuss a couple of trends that are very encouraging right now in terms of moving more people from left to right in that diagram, and particularly our focus, which is individuals with mental or physical disabilities. And one of those trends, frankly, is the low unemployment rate. You know, back when the unemployment rate was twice its current levels, and there were a lot of candidates out there recently released for good reason, not attributable to their own fault, you know, companies downsizing or whatever. There were a lot of employees out there with pristine backgrounds. And it seems like low-hanging fruit for a hiring manager. Well, why don't I grab this gal or this guy? You know, there's nothing in their background that would indicate there's anything to worry about, nothing risky. And obviously that's no longer the case. As the unemployment rate goes down, speaking bluntly here, the remaining strata of candidates has more and more representation of individuals with barriers to employment. And now that we're down to around, 3.8, 3.7% in Iowa, obviously that remaining strata of candidates, you're going to have a lot of individuals there who have prior criminal convictions, who have limited English proficiency, who have mental or physical disability, et cetera. These are ones who have been overlooked by the mass of employees. But I think the important thing to recognize is there still remain fantastic employees among the remaining unemployed. And your diligence, your ability to see that will be your victory if you can snag some of these employees. Because as you'll see later, what we're hearing from employers is that individuals who have overcome significant life challenges or patterns of failure tend to have a remarkable work ethic and a commitment to the job that is frequently lacking in the general population. One thing that we often hear among employers who avail themselves of these talent pools is that you know, we don't see that sense of entitlement that we see so often with other employees. I mean, they're here on time, they're committed, they take a long view, and we absolutely love having them here. And undoubtedly, that mentality would not have developed if the individual hadn't suffered, if they hadn't had to face some hard things in their lives and become a mature, both physically and emotionally mature individual as a result of those trials. And so it brings to you someone who's very effective, in many cases somebody who's not going to sweat the small things because they've already seen big things in their lives and they've overcome those. So the low unemployment rate is really turning employers' attention at a higher and higher rate towards some unconventional candidates. They have to do it for survival. And I think what they're going to find is some outstanding employees that have previously eluded them. And the second is a growing consumer emphasis on corporate responsibility. This is something we see particularly among the younger generations. You can't survey millennials without seeing that they place a great deal of importance on companies that demonstrate a good social conscience. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Let's look at the raw numbers now. At a 3.7% unemployment rate, that means that we have approximately 63,000 Iowans who are unemployed. And to give that number a visual reference, imagine Jack Trice Field up in Ames, Iowa, seats around 61,000, I'm told, when all the corners are filled up. So that visual gives you a good idea of the number of individuals currently in the state of Iowa who are counted among our unemployed. And of course, the criteria for unemployed are you are of working age and you are actively seeking employment. Now, a few things I'll say about this number. At first blush, it seems like an awful lot of people, but we need to consider a couple of things. Firstly, almost no one in that stadium lives anywhere near your place of business. So they're of no use to you at all. Secondly, many of the individuals in that stadium are only nominally employable. They may have unresolved problems of drug or alcohol addiction. They may have social issues, not a very high emotional intelligence quotient. These may be people who just traditionally can get along for a few days, but then as soon as any kind of heat is on, they're going to blow up, and everybody hates to work with them. Those kinds of people are going to occupy that stadium. A lot of people in that stadium don't own a car, and they don't have any reliable transportation. And that's a killer for so many would-be job seekers. And employers have become very attuned to that because you don't have to be burned too many times before you realize. I don't care if you have Plan B, Plan C, and Plan D to get to work. The odds are you're not going to show up when we need you. So the necessity of reliable transportation is inescapable. So a lot of these 63,000 people are just what I would call ghost workforce. They're either not anywhere near you, or even if they were, they're not going to work out for you. Maybe they don't possess the skills and qualifications you require. Bottom line, if this is our only source of candidates in the state of Iowa moving forward, then Iowa is in deep trouble, and we're whistling through the graveyard. There's another number, however, that we discuss far less frequently, and that is our labor force participation rate. That's defined as the percentage of people who are either employed or actively seeking employment. Now, in Iowa, our labor force participation rate is usually around 70%. And it's usually pretty good in the Midwest, upper Midwest. There's not a whole lot of daylight between us and a lot of the other states. But here's what it looks like numerically. Here in the state of Iowa, again, we've got about 63,000 unemployed, or one Jack Trice Stadium. We have an untapped workforce. That means individuals who are of working age but are neither working nor actively seeking employment. That number is in excess of 300,000 Iowans, or nearly 5 full Jack Trice Stadiums. Now, of course, the question that immediately arises is, who the devil are these people? Well, there are a variety of reasons, many of them totally legitimate, why they might occupy one of these 5 stadiums. One is, are they a full-time college student? They would be counted within that number, and obviously they're currently idle from the full-time workforce. Also, they may be rich. They may not have to work. It may be individuals who have opted to stay home and care for family members. It may be individuals who have mental or physical disabilities that render them unable to work. And so some of them, legitimate reasons, it's understandable they're not in there. But some of those are what I would call the tragic cases of individuals who are would-be employees in the state of Iowa, but they're being hindered by the barriers to employment, and unnecessarily so. It may be returning veterans who are having a difficult time getting acclimated to a civilian workforce. It may be older workers who are encountering age discrimination. It may be immigrants and refugees to our state who have overcome hellish circumstances to get here. They have character in spades, and yet because of their limited English, they're unable to find meaningful work here in the U.S., despite the fact that they may have been profoundly talented in their home country. So you get the idea. Ex-offenders, huge part of this category. They ultimately give up, and frankly, they probably reoffend because they can't get into the workforce. So our argument is simple. If we can engage just 1/4 of Iowa's untapped workforce, we will more than double our supply of available workers. Essentially, we will add a stadium. And the impact on Iowa would be profound. The fact of the matter is we would have a huge ready stream of workers for the Iowa employers who so desperately need them. And for those individuals that we bring in from the untapped workforce, the state would have the benefit of the goods and services that they produce, the benefit of their tax dollars. We would have the reduced burden on our public assistance programs. We would undoubtedly have reduced recidivism and the expense of keeping inmates. And perhaps most importantly, we would have more and more of our fellow Iowans who know the joy and the dignity of participation in the American dream. And for their lives, it is absolutely incalculably huge that we get them into the workforce. So any efforts that we're making in that direction, such as this educational series, is well worth our time. It's important. A little bit more on the increased consumer focus on corporate social responsibility. This arises from a survey of millennials who seem to be particularly attuned to this issue. Corporate social responsibility, through their polling, is shown to influence what to buy or where to shop. Fully 84% of millennials are guided in their decision-making by the presence or absence of a corporate social conscience. Where to work, 78%, and if you don't think that has meaning in a talent war, that's enormous. Which stocks or mutual funds to invest in, 64%, and which products or services to recommend to people, 82%. So that demonstrates clearly that with millennials, it's huge. The company that has a reputation for doing the right thing will do well financially because they will attract business, they will attract employees like no other organization. And we have found that companies who hire individuals who are, let's say, unconventional candidates, individuals with mental or physical disabilities, that is appreciated to an enormous level by the buying public. And it's more than just sentiments. Clearly, it results in dollars and cents. People steer their business, people steer their recommendations to those companies because they're moved by that. And they also realize that companies don't have to do it. You know, in point of fact, a company's legal charter is such that it exists for one reason and one reason only, and that is to enrich shareholder value. And, you know, I've joked before that, you know, if an individual had that as their operating principle for life, everything I say or do has one end in mind, to enrich me, we would call that individual a psychopath. You know, and corporations are legally people. So one person wrote a book a few months ago called Corporate Psychopaths, where he was underscoring the fact that just to be guided only by that monetary principle to the exclusion of all others paints a less than stellar image in the minds of the public. So many companies have wised up to that, and they've begun engaging in cause-based marketing and things of that nature, and also just being attuned to what they're doing from a social conscience perspective, including whom they hire. And clearly that's making a big impact. So, you know, I'm a capitalist, and I believe that if we're going to change this in a sustainable way, there is a business solution, and the business solution is that the companies open up their minds, their hearts, and their eyes to the fact that these are not charity jobs. These are individuals who make a terrific contribution organization-wide. They elevate the morale of existing employees, and they elevate the perception of that organization within the populace, and business tends to gravitate then toward that business. So it works in the marketplace, and companies have proven that. So what we're all about with the America's Job Honor Awards is shattering any preconceptions that people have. You know, I know from my own personal experience that all the statistics in the world can't win hearts and minds, but personal stories have that power. And indeed, it was the personal stories that changed my heart. You know, there was a time up to and including the beginning of my branch managership with Manpower, where I had probably a pretty typical view of the chronically unemployed and underemployed. My attitude was, hey man, you got a lousy work ethic, you reap what you sow. I got nothing for you. There's jobs out there, go work them. It wasn't a bed of roses for me either. So in that analysis then, I was able to largely dismiss them. And it wasn't until I dove in to the middle part of that equation where the barriers lie and began learning some of the personal stories that it became evident to me that the hand of cards that has been dealt to some of our fellow Iowans is in some cases shocking. And you read a few of those, and you'll feel like you might as well have been Bill Gates' kid. You read some individuals, raised with 6 or 7 siblings by a grandmother, taught nothing, showing up at kindergarten not knowing the names of their colors because no one could be bothered to tell them, and just having zero conception of how it is to operate in polite society, to say nothing of a polite marketplace. So, people who are really starting out with a tough hand of cards, and obviously beyond the social, we know individuals who are born with physical or mental disabilities that have created challenges for them, lifelong challenges that have caused them to develop a depth of character that, frankly, many of us could not conceive of because we haven't had to overcome such things. So a closer look for me really did teach me that I needed, rather than to condemn them, I needed to be their advocate. And in many cases, there are individuals who already have a terrific work ethic and they want to enter the workforce, but they need just a little bit of mentoring, a little bit of help, some of those agencies in the middle part of the equation. And then they need to meet up with the right employer, the employer who can see that with some modest accommodation, we just won a fantastic employee. And so shattering those preconceptions is very important. I know there are a lot of employers out there who have pre-screen requirements that were developed when the unemployment rate was twice its current levels. And back in the day, it may have made sense if you ran an ad for a production worker and were greeted with an inch-tall stack of applications on Monday morning, that the first order of business was to reduce the size of that stack. And how better to do that than to start wheedling through it, say, ooh, felony, trash can, job hopper, trash can. Gosh, look at these criminal offenses, trash can. And by the time you get through with that process, you've got your 1/8-inch stack. Well, the challenge now is you're starting with an 1/8-inch stack. And while I would still agree that individuals with unaddressed, unresolved patterns of failure do not belong in the workforce, I'd say that the danger of that approach is a lot of those individuals in the trash can, a lot of those applications belong to individuals whose lives are demonstrably on a new trajectory. And you got to give them an opportunity to explain that. When I speak to a group of ex-offenders at Fort Des Moines, I will often begin by saying, I have no desire whatsoever to teach you how to deceive a hiring manager. If the patterns of failure that landed you here have not changed, then you'll just go out on the job, you'll blow it, you'll cost everybody a lot of time and money. And I tell them that not to be harsh, but I tell them that because the truth will set you free. I need to lay the stage for them and let them know if you have not changed, that's the necessary requisite. You need to escape those behaviors in order to be employment ready. But I also teach them that while that first step, change, is necessary, it is not sufficient. There's a second stage, and that is convince the hiring manager that you've changed. And that's easier said than done. But I equip them with some tools and skills, including, for example, I tell them you need to be able to articulate your life. You need to demonstrate some self-awareness. And I give them a little 3 steps. 1, acknowledge the patterns of failure that previously prevailed in your life. 2, be able to explain the event or series of events that enabled you to turn it around. And 3, lay out your vision for the future. And if you can do that, then you'll convince a hiring manager that you know where you've been, you know where you've come, you know where you're going, and you're a changed man or a changed woman. And moreover, you can excite in the hiring manager a sense of empathy, of wanting to get on board your turnaround and perhaps help you down that road with a job. And so in many cases, the employers can tell if the candidate's coming to them with a story that demonstrates that they are work ready. They've given it some thought, they've developed a self-awareness, and they are ready for prime time. And sometimes, we look at the issue, the huge numbers of our disengaged workforce, and I found that it can often cause people to throw up their arms in despair and say, well, what difference does it make? Because it's only a drop in the ocean. If I hire this individual with a learning disability, what difference does it make? There's 300 lined up behind her, that also need the job. I don't have 300 openings. Well, I always try to convince people that the truth that you can indeed make a difference. And there's an old parable that used to be told a great deal. I was reluctant to share it for ages because I thought it was so saturated out there, but I found that so many people have not heard it that I'm bringing it back. And it's called The Parable of the Star Thrower. And an old man's walking along the beach with his grandson. And as they walk along chatting, the little boy occasionally reaches down and picks up a starfish that is washed up onto the beach, and he tosses it into the ocean. And so they continue on talking, the boy occasionally throwing the starfish, and finally the old man grows curious. And he asks the boy, he says, why are you doing that, son? And his grandson replies, well, they've washed up on the shore, and unless I throw them back into the ocean, they'll dry up and they'll die. And the old man considers that for a moment, and he glances up and down the beach before and behind them, and he sees that there are literally thousands of starfish littering the beach. So he turns again to his grandson and he says, don't you see the magnitude, all these starfish ahead of us, behind us? What you're doing can't possibly make a difference. And the little boy looks down at the starfish in his hand and simply replies, it matters to this one. And he gently tosses it into the waves. So when we are able to help a single candidate, it matters to this one. You'll be seeing the Megan Dawson video if you've not seen it already. It mattered to her, and the reports that I've received from her and from her mother since then is that her ability to get that job at Hy-Vee has been absolutely life-changing. And I had the pleasure a few months after that award ceremony at which she was honored to participate in a Iowa Public Radio interview. And we wanted to bring in some prior honorees. And I knew from our previous experience with Megan that she was pretty reluctant to go on camera, very shy. And I called her and her mother to extend the invitation nevertheless, and was told, absolutely, be happy to do it. And so Megan joined us on that statewide radio interview, and she made an amazing case, just so compelling. And I was just very moved at the impact that this has had on her life, the confidence that it has enabled her to build. And there's nothing more important than that. And what a joy that if we, while still, maintaining our duties as employees, if we can simultaneously make a huge difference in someone's life. And a poem that I read many, many years ago had a line from it that I never quite shook. It made a deep impression on me. And this poem from Oliver Wendell Holmes, The Voiceless, had a line, alas for those who never sing, but die with all their music in them. Now, when I look at the thousands of disadvantaged job seekers, many of whom will never find their way into the workforce, I think of them as those who will never sing but die with all their music in them. They're hoping that something will break big for them, but let's face it, in most cases it doesn't. And then one day the grave, and it's over, and you never really played a part. You were like one of those kids getting picked for sports teams who the coach has to assign at the end, because nobody picks you. And there's a special kind of pain associated with being left out. And I certainly hate the thought that would be the theme of someone's life from cradle to grave. If we can engage some of those workers by seeing the value that is within them and giving them what little help they need to get over the line, then we have truly done something wonderful, and we've enabled somebody to achieve their goals. And with that, I'll go ahead and put my contact information on the screen, and would love to have you follow us on Twitter. You can see those handles at the bottom. That's something I'm focused on because I'm realizing belatedly that that's one of the main ways that we can keep our followers updated on the goings-on of America's Job Honor Awards. So I would appreciate it very much if you would join us there. Follow us on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn, and I'd be thrilled to get you involved in the Job Honor Awards and help you in any way I can. And I'll also mention that I have a publication that I have written that is directed at ex-offenders called Dealing with Red Flags in Your Background, and that's posted on my LinkedIn profile. And so if you know anybody who is so hindered in your life who's job seeking, you can direct them to that essay and see if it does them any good. I'm currently at work on a version that's employer-facing and giving employers some keys to how do you make an intelligent hire when you're looking at ex-offenders. So hopefully that is coming soon. But with that, I'm sure that you're all going to now break down into some great discussion, and it's been a real honor to address you. I appreciate your interest in this subject, and I appreciate the good things you're going to do moving forward. Thanks very much, and with that, Kathy, I'll turn things back to you.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you for helping us stretch our mindset beyond our own perceptions. I want to thank the audience today on behalf of the State Rehabilitation Council with the Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services. If you want to learn how you can tap into a workforce that's ready and excited to work, please reach out to your local Voc Rehab office to start the conversation. Congratulations on your journey to build your bottom line by hiring individuals who have a disability. Thank you.